Good morning, everyone. Does the mic work? Yes. I would like to welcome the participants of our roundtable. Discussion on the topic is the actual energy market in Ukraine. This is a rhetoric question, but really serious for us. The management of Naftogaz, the new leadership says that they want to create energy market for the benefit of Ukraine, and Yuriy Vitrenko is going to tell us about it. I would like to present our guests, Yuriy Vitrenko, Chief Commercial Director, Naftogaz Group, Tetyana Ryabukha, Oil Sector Department, National Commission for State Regulatory, Alan Riley, Senior Research Fellow of the Institute of Public Affairs, Senior Fellow of Atlantic Council. Also, the representative of Ministry of Regional Development is absent. Viktor Merkushov, Vice President of all-Ukrainian Energy Association of Ukraine. Andriy Gerus is absent. So, these are the participants of our roundtable. And first, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Vitrenko to focus on the issue of gas market. Is there reforms? Are there reforms, and what are the prospects? So, what language should I use? We have translation into English, so you can speak Ukrainian. Evidently, the reform is ongoing, and there are positive changes that are felt by all the people in Ukraine, not only citizens of Ukraine, but also citizens of other countries, and this is a complex reform connected with different aspects, starting with the changes of the principle of formation of the price for the consumers, household consumers, and they felt this because the price was elevated, but also we can state that there is a change in this principle of forming the price is critically important for the survival of the state. Because the state spent for subsidies in 2014 more than $9 million. Now the state provide for subsidies $2 billion, so $7 billion. Yes, so this is a big sum for the budget of Ukraine, and I personally believe that Ukraine as a state could not survive without this. So this was a painful reform, but really necessary and efficient, because there were reductions in the consumption of gas. They testified that as a consequence of this price rise and trying to bring them to the market level, the consequence of this is that people started to think what amount of gas they spent, and they started to use less. And the dream of many people who is dealing with energy efficiency in Ukraine, they want to bring Ukraine up to the level of Poland as to energy efficiency, and we had many problems in this, despite the help of many international organizations and initiatives in Ukraine. Only after the prices were raised, we saw that each year this consumption is reduced, and this is good for energy efficiency, and it is also good for the budget. As to competitiveness in the market, we should distribute the market in several, divide the market into several segments. If we are speaking about selling, trading for commercial users, what we call industry, we include also all use non for so the prices were regulated by the National Commission for State Regulation, and now the prices are based on market, and it didn't lead to some distress. The market is now more transparent, and the commercial users, they benefited from it, that this market became more efficient and was liberalized. Also, if we look at the gas for commercial users, one of the segment is import of gas, and here we want to demonstrate that Naftogaz develops competitive market. We want to see it in reality, and Naftogaz did not abuse its situation and promoted competition in the area, and this is an unusual situation when the main player does everything possible in order to promote competition, and we saw it that the volume of private import increased, and you know that the volume reduced more than 2 times, and this is the consequence that the energy efficiency was increased because of use of gas fuel. And we see that the Naftogaz want to promote competition, otherwise there won't be such a situation. So we see that this amount full and private import is on the rise. So we liberalized the market where we could do it. And also we have also renowned expert in global policy and expert in gas markets. So we have an elephant in the room here. So we have Gazprom, and we should clearly understand that due to the efforts of Gazprom, we cannot fully integrate into European market, and we cannot also distribute and unbundle Naftogaz, and also we cannot provide it with interconnectors with Slovakia and Dana, and we do not use effective bypasses, and we also could do many things, but the Gazprom prevents this, and the Euro Commission was not able to help us to force Gazprom to adhere to European legislation, the territory of EU, Slovakia, and we signed the only option we have is Stockholm court. So this was a reserve variant. We hope that the European Commission will be able to help us by trilateral negotiations, that the Gazprom will adhere to European legislation, but this is not the case. So now our basic option is the Stockholm court, and this will help us to unblock reforms that were blocked by Gazprom. And also I'd like to say, and we are trying to find compromise with the Commission, with the regulator, and we have some positive results. And the transformation of the market was ongoing really fast, and as I told you, we didn't have any other option. We should have it really fast, and maybe we want more structural approach, but we didn't have such an opportunity. That's why some things we were able to do it fast, but some things we were not able to implement. But as I understand, we have some positive developments, and the use of European Code of Balancing that we as Naftogaz, we supported, and Ukrtransgaz, and sometimes is two independent operator. This is a separate story. And there were some decisions that were not optimum at that time, but they have been taken. So we do not have a European code of balancing that would enable to balance the market daily. So our market would resemble more European market. If we speak that, do we have market? So it all should be done in comparison. So if we see European market, we do not see liquid gas. We do not see trading daily. We see only some prices that are changing, and we see indicators, and people see that the market exists. So there are some steps that we should make in order that everyone in Ukraine see that the market works like in Europe. So this is maybe the end of my speech, and now I will be ready to answer the questions.
Thank you, Igor. I expect to hear a lot of interesting questions to you, but now I would like to ask Ms. Tetyana Ryabukha the same questions, whether we do have the gas market and whether the reform is proceeding successfully, and who wishes to hamper it. Thank you for all these questions. Of course, the reform is going on, but the reforming could not happen within one night. Let's recollect what happened last year, when the gas market law was passed. Before that, we had the law which was based on the second energy package. By March last year, we did not have full implementation of the law based on the second energy package. The most important part of it, split of all gases into companies which would separately distribute gas and transport gas. But later, the new law on the gas market reform, on the gas market functioning, based on the third energy package, was passed, and unfortunately the provisions of that law gave a very short period for development of secondary legislation, only 90 days. While that secondary legislation, the Code of Gas Transportation System, the Code of Gas Distribution Networks, the rules for storage, supplies for households, supplies of the last resort, suppliers of the last resort, and stimulating regulation based on the input-output approach. The law came into force on October 1st and immediately fall into conflict with with two other important laws of Ukraine. And unfortunately, that laws had to be amended by the parliament, and the parliament did not vote for that amendments. And only a month ago, the State Commission on Regulating Tariffs for Utilities, the regulator in the gas sector, finally managed to pass necessary amendments via the parliament and to bring them into accordance with the new gas law. Currently, these new amendments are in the president's office, waiting for his final signing. The secondary legislation was passed, and from January 1st, the country started to live in line with the new rules. Of course, there were some challenges, and this is very demanding and very dynamic process, and unfortunately, we need to apply the empirical approach. Only having tried something in practice, we can find any shortcomings in our legislation. I assume that procedure of the procedure for passage of new necessary corrections, amendments to the past law may require up to 3 months. What was done during this year, the changes to the gas transportation code about entry and exit points for gas supplies. Also, we brought some provisions in accordance with the European norms. So now what are the main problem issues with the secondary legislation? Producing companies applied about the quality of gas. Unfortunately, the new code provides for sanctions for low quality of gas. They find sanctions in the view of producing companies were extremely high. They had no enough time window to raise the quality of the produced gas, and this issue was discussed, and the provision about gas quality compliance was slightly postponed. That is, fines will be applied later in order to allow the gas production companies to raise the quality gradually. And the draft of this document is on the Utilities Commission website. Another big issue raised this year by consumers of gas transport, by users of gas transportation system was as follows. That requesting gas transportation capacities based on the metered volumes was unfair, and they and now so the procedure was slightly improved for them. Each month we introduce changes to some regulations, and this does not mean that we did a lot of mistakes in the past or that we badly drafted the documents, but this only means that we learn as we go, and the similar processes happened in many countries. Also, we suggested the new version of the gas transportation system code. We will very soon have a new code on gas distribution, and there are a lot of issues. Why? As of today, we do not have commercial daily balancing, we have commercial monthly balancing, and this creates some issues. When we finally will manage to shift to the daily balancing, this will resolve a lot of issues. But in order to do this, not only Naftogaz, but other balancing actors should be able to do this technically. As soon as they signal to us that they are prepared and ready and are capable to do this, we will immediately shift to the daily balancing. The new model of that balancing reflected in the new code, which we are drafting now. We are coordinating our work with all the actors. But when it will be finished, I cannot be 100% sure. I hope we will finish it by January 1st. That is what I wish to say.
Що вже принесли вам перекладачі, тому що я зараз буду передавати слово колезі, який буде говорити англійською. Хто хоче практикуватися в англійській, будь ласка. А хто має перекладач...
As far as I see you... Где он?
Make some point from outside, because we heard from previous speakers that reform is going. It is ongoing here in Ukraine, and we are on the way to make a gas market here in this country. We also heard story about big elephant, Gazprom, who is actually do not help at all in this process. What is your opinion? What do you see? Whether we have this reform in Ukraine, and whether it is going that fast as our colleagues are saying, and nobody could do it that fast in Europe.
I think there is a tendency in Ukraine to assume that everybody is faster, speedier, and better in the European Union. And that is not necessarily the case. And in the gas markets, I think the point to realize is that apart from the United Kingdom, which was the original creator of the liberalization system, it has been a long and bloody battle over about 20 years to establish a more or less liberalized gas market in at least northwestern Europe. It's not even complete within the European Union. And the thing about it, which I don't think is immediately obvious, is that the level of resistance within the European Union has been enormous. I mean, one of the jokes in Brussels was that, who was the true enemy of European liberalization reform? And there is Gazprom, and that's another story which I'll come back to. But the argument was that it was in two groups of letters: EDF, Électricité de France, and GDF, Gaz de France. And these were the two enemies of liberalization as far as the European Union was concerned. And they opposed the liberalization from the very beginning, and it took, as I say, 2 decades. Remember, the reason why we have 3 energy packages, the first energy package, the second energy package, and the most liberalizing one, the third energy package, was because the only way the EU could deal with this was chip at all of the different problems bit by bit. And in many ways, if you actually look at most of the European market actually has been very much like, very traditional, very much like what it is in Ukraine and indeed in Russia. In the sense that the traditional approach in Europe, outside the British Isles, was a dominant incumbent player, which controlled the entire supply system, totally vertically integrated, and it produced either its own gas or a mix of its own gas and a long-term supply contract with Gazprom or Sonatrach, whoever. And so the entire thing was closed down, controlled, there was no competition. That was the European model. And I think one of the difficulties if you're in Ukraine, you think the model you've got is the terribly difficult, terribly problematic Ukrainian model. What you've actually got is the old traditional European model. I think that's one of the points to understand about this. It is not something where Ukraine is unique. I think that's part of what is worth thinking about in terms of this. The other element is to look at the Central and Eastern European states. Now, they joined the European Union in 2004 or 2007, and they have changed, but still, it has taken an enormously long time. It's now 12 years since most of them joined in 2004, and still, you have a lot of dominant players who are still there. The amount of liberalization in Central and Eastern Europe has increased, but it has been a very long and slow process. So I don't think you can necessarily say that Ukraine is in any way failing in what it's done or is super behind in comparison with Central and Eastern Europe, which I think is the model. There are also parallels with Central and Eastern Europe. One of the major problems which Yuriy Vitrenko referred to was the difficulty of unbundling when you've got Gazprom in the shadow. I mean, that has been an issue in Central and Eastern Europe, where the danger is if you unbundle, you actually increase Gazprom's power. And that can be a number of ways, where either Gazprom trying to seek to control the pipeline, or one of the other worries with a number of Central and Eastern European states is if we unbundle, will a Russian-owned entity, not Gazprom, but some Russian-controlled group, take over control of the pipeline? So these are issues which don't exist in Western Europe, but they do exist in Central and Eastern Europe for a whole host of reasons. And then there are a whole number of other questions about the ability of Gazprom to play different aspects of the market to try and disrupt liberalization. One thing is, if you try and create a liquid trading hub, how can you be sure that Gazprom will not play and try and rig the market against you? That's all these sort of things. And these are issues which don't exist so much in Central and Eastern Europe. Which don't exist so much in Western Europe. The Central and Eastern Europeans are aware of them more. And there is a beginning to understand that we need to deal with those as well in the European Union. So there are more similarities than differences overall, and there are specific issues, factors which Central and Eastern Europe and Ukraine share. I think the other point, a big point I think is worth making, is that in order to try, there are a number of kind of lessons. One of the major lessons is in terms of what is often called corporate governance institutions. So one element is to liberalize the market and go through the process of doing that under European rules. And the second element is the corporate governance element, and that is partly ensuring you've got effective and independent antitrust regulators and energy regulators. I mentioned antitrust competition law because one of the major ways that the market was liberalized in Europe was not through liberalization so much, but through competition regulation. So that from about 2005, the European Commission opened a series of cases against energy companies, looking at all the competition law questions. Have the dominant players been abusing their dominant position? Were there restrictive practices which undermine the operation of the market? And that had a huge impact. I mean, for example, RWE and Aon were forced to open up their markets and allow more competitors in a number of cases. And of course, more recently, the Commission switched from attacking or investigating energy companies in Western Europe to move eastward to look at Gazprom in the big Gazprom antitrust case, where we may get a decision, I think, in the next year on that case. So having powerful energy regulators to liberalize the market and run that system, and then having a powerful and independent antitrust regulator is important as part of that system. I mean, the other element of all of this is to try and ensure that any of the rules that you create have got a significant degree of clarity, and people understand what where the obligations lie between the energy companies and the social support for the population. And one of the difficulties is, one of the kind of popular misconceptions is that the effect of liberalisation is to put extra burdens on the people, make it more difficult for the people. But the point about it is if you look at liberalisation in the European market and you take a graph of the prices across the market, all the countries which have liberalised the market have lower prices for consumers. And all those countries which haven't have higher prices. And actually, there's a fantastic map of this on DG Energies on the European Commission's website, which demonstrates this. But the point about it is it's understanding we need clarity on, first of all, how we do social support. So one of the things in Ukraine which you've done is which you've increased the prices, but you've created a social support system for people to access if they can't afford the gas. That's clear. In a sense, you have social support, which is one thing, and you have the gas price, which is transparent and clear and based on proper economic basis, on a commercial basis, on another. And equally, and one of the other things I was understanding from the Ukrainian press was all this debate about mayors in various towns across Ukraine complaining about the gas prices and expecting the energy companies to take on the social obligations and taking the payments for the accepting very little or no payments for the gas. You can't do that. You've got to keep this transparent. If you are going to get a liberalised market where you have over time lower prices, you need to operate on a commercial basis. And if local schools and hospitals need cheap gas, then that has to be funded out of the state budget and not out of the budget of the energy companies. Because if you start mixing these things up, it's much more difficult to get investors into the market. It's more difficult to actually introduce energy efficiency measures. You can start distorting the entire system. So it's really important to have clarity about what is social funding provided out of the social funding budgets and what is liberalisation, and keep the two things separate. And then you get the best of all worlds. You get lower energy prices and you get social support. I think that's the way you go with this. So I think on that point I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Дякуємо Алану. Я думаю,
Thank you very much, Alan. I think that journalists have a lot of questions already, especially about recent decision about prolongation or postponing of the debts, utility debts for households. And extension of payments for utility debts for households. Thank you for this opportunity. I think that this topic is now discussed very intensively. This is, I think, the third roundtable, and recently the Utilities Commission, the regulator, held public hearings, but no Commission members attended it, but nevertheless the hearings happened and were useful, I think. I would like to start with the law on gas market. Of course, this is very good law, very progressive law, very European-like law. But when we read the law, we clearly understand that it is of declarative nature. Unfortunately, we cannot see the provisions of direct action, which is now the trend for the European Union. once in Italy, I saw the draft law describing the rules for vertically integrated companies, which clearly set the procedure for involvement of such a company, what to do, how to do, etc. While in our law, we wrote our law with the big involvement of the European Energy Secretariat, and did not tailor it to Ukrainian reality. And due to this, we had big problems with the secondary legislation, because the law is of very general nature. And having passed the law, we found out that our bodies were not ready to this law. Actually, the entire legislation which existed before the passage of that law, it was cancelled by passage of this law. And we found, immediately after passage, we found out that we had to develop a lot of secondary legislation pieces immediately. So the measures which we have taken during this year balance the situation somehow, but not fully. In order to have competitive or liberalized gas market depends very much on the strong, independent, professional national regulator. But during this year, we found out that the decisions made by the regulator not always responded to the liberalization of market. For example, NERC initiated a new market price for natural gas. Everybody supports this. Everybody believes that it should be done. But when you make this decision, you should look not on the mathematics on paper, but look around into the real world. And by today, neither society nor the experts are not sure that the price was set correctly. I understand why people are so unhappy about the prices. I understand that the government tried to create the system of subsidies, which balances the price for the most vulnerable population, but it does not stimulate people for energy saving. The figures showing consumption in the market, that is a drop in consumption in the market, is not due to the energy saving, is due to the decreased consumption. Recently, I visited one village where people wore a lot of warm clothes because they're afraid to turn on their heating, gas heating in homes. And so I think that first initiative about raising price was done incorrectly. Of course, the decision was right, but the way how it was done was incorrect. Yesterday, I've heard that we will allow extended payment of gas fees, gas payments for households, which means that middle-class consumers who are unable to afford these gas prices also, they will be allowed, in winter season, they will be allowed to extend their payments for summertime, not just for winter, but for summertime too. But what will happen to the energy companies? What will happen to the revenues to be paid by these companies? Because their revenues will be postponed till summer. Then decision of the NERC, which introduced the transportation model entry-exit from January 1st this year. But unfortunately, the model remains inactive in Ukraine, but the taxation is active. Gazprom supplies gas in line with this model. Ukrtransgaz works in line with this model and has to pay taxes in line with this model. I'm not sure that that the results won't be very detrimental. Maybe, would you please explain more the question from audience? Maybe Mr. Vitrenko would explain. I just wish to say that nobody knows what will be the result. So the price for transportation in main pipeline is raised, but Gazprom acts in line with the old contract from 2009, while our domestic legislation accrues revenues and accrues revenues and taxes in line with the new Ukrainian legislation. Maybe Ukrtransgaz will find itself in a lot of losses in result of this model. How this will be resolved? Maybe something will be, some decisions will be repealed, some decisions will be taken, but we do not know what will happen. Another aspect, till now we do not have efficient monitoring system on the market. The 1 year had passed, but we do not have any monitoring in place. We have not introduced the stimulating funding for the suppliers. NERC has different approaches for labor remuneration in different subsectors like electricity, gas, and coal heating, coal-based heating production. And unfortunately, they do not make any steps in this direction. The law provisions about commercial metering of gas are also not implemented. The law provided that consumers of gas, which are companies or enterprises, had to install meters. and also special meters for consumers who use gas for cooking and for hot water production in their houses, in their homes. Also metering had to be introduced, and these provisions which I mentioned, they are not implemented. Although the metering based on buildings, for example, multi-storied buildings, is implemented. Unfortunately, some municipalities are opposing this process and prohibited to install metering in their cities and towns. You might remember that news that we found 500 million cubic meters of gas and withdraw them from the oligarchs, but this was due to the decreased consumption. For market actors, this was rather harmful. The norms were cut down based on that new figures, and the balances became negative. And the balance, which was established during some years, was ruined. And unfortunately, now, during last 2 years, the gas distribution companies are at the age of survival in the market. About market operators and about tariffs. The subscriber fees. If subscriber fees will be introduced in line with the model which is offered by the law, again, people will be very unhappy. I think we should carry out very broad public discussion about this and raise public awareness. Today, the income of gas distribution companies in winter and summertime differs more than three times, and that's natural. But we should make this coherent with our legislation. I agree with Mr. Riley that the liberalization in the market abroad was done also not very quickly, and I agree that this was very much opposed by vertically integrated companies like Rurgas, like Transgas, like Gazprom, and I absolutely understand our Naftogaz company, which opposes this, but I do not understand the position of the government, which does not try to limit the monopoly of this company. Will you please sum it up? The company controls all state production, UGV. It controls Ukrtransgaz. It has a special status of last resort supplier, and due to this, it delivers 20% of balancing services. As far as I know, that Naftogaz has 20% preferences in balancing. Also, big excessive payments in and preferences in payments in VAT payment. And resolution about 129. NERC can do nothing about the tariffs. We cannot change the price for population. Sorry, I have to stop you. We have to have parity in our interventions. That's why I should say that we have some progress, but we do not have competitive liberal gas market in Ukraine. I saw that Mr. Vitrenko made a lot of notes when Mr. Merkushov spoke. I would start from the last statements. All the speculations about Naftogaz come from poor understanding of what's going on and how reforming of the market should be introduced. All preferences of Naftogaz are based on special responsibilities, special duties carried out by Naftogaz. All those special responsibilities of Naftogaz are an excessive burden. When you have a very heavy load on your back and you say, it's very heavy for me to carry it on, I need new socks. You are given new socks, but you have to carry that load. We have some consumers who are unable to pay or pay later. So what was described as the fight against monopolists, this is just a manifestation of lobbyism from some structures. When we compare ourselves with Gaz de France, which opposed liberalization of the market, look what we are doing. We have passed the law. We also allowed other suppliers of imported gas. You understand that without this, the market is not possible. The exit entry tariffs are major mechanisms for liberalization of the market. You know that second and third packages were passed in order to allow this exit entry tariffs, because without them, normal market is impossible. The experts do not understand whether tariff is well grounded. There are just plain people, ordinary people who are unable to understand. But experts should understand this. The Cabinet of Ministers set a limited price or and forces us to supply not higher than this price. The difference between cabinet price and the market price has to be compensated by the state. That's why you cannot blame the cabinet that they had set ungrounded price. If the cabinet says we do not have more money to compensate the difference between market price and limited price, and that's it. The cabinet says we are able to pay this amount of subsidies, this amount of compensations, and that's it. When we speak about unbundling, Mr. Riley mentioned that even in Europe there were companies which opposed this. When in Ukraine we tried to do unbundling, we understand that Naftogaz is a part of the contract for gas transportation in Ukraine. We are operators of 80% of this function, while Ukrtransgaz is operator of 20% of this function. And we say that that Ukrtransgaz should do it part. Gazprom does not allow us to pass this our obligation of transportation to other company. What can we do? And based on the assumption that Ukraine is not reliable partner because they wish to do unbundling, and immediately Europeans believe this and say that there is a threat to gas supplies in winter, etc. So we sat together with the European Commission and suggested to become an intermediary. And asked Gazprom to allow this unbundling of Ukrainian operator for 2 years. European Commission tries to convince Gazprom. Gazprom denied from the negotiations, and in Stockholm, we will request that Gazprom allow us to do this unbundling, and we request that the national regulator should comply with the GTS code, etc. And this will fully reflect the European legislation. That is what we request from Gazprom. When we look at tariffs, when NERC is blamed that they have unclear exit-entry tariffs, unless we have these tariffs, we cannot raise this issue in Stockholm arbitration. And those people who postponed the issue about exit-entry tariffs, they earned $4 billion on this non-compliance with European law rules. I have finished. This was a question. How would you say the well-grounded tariffs, exit entry? Now let's shift to questions and answers.
Natalia Protka, Glавcom. Question to Alan Riley. The question is, what would you advise to do? What would you advise to our government? We are speaking about tariffs, about social protection, about subsidies, but we should always remember that starting 2014, the wages of people fell more than 3 times, and the prices, not only for gas and electricity and so on, raised up to the world level. And the people who were middle class, doctors, teachers, engineers, they now get pensions that are really low, and these are tens of millions of people who are in this situation. And subsidies, this is nothing. This only helps a little. But these people have huge problems. And maybe you read in papers how they call those things. They call it genocide of people of Ukraine. They believe that this is a genocide, destruction of Ukrainians. And we, as journalists, we should reflect the views of people. How can I tell people what Vitrenko tells us? He speaks about beautiful reforms in the gas market, but how can we provide information to simple lay people that they have only, for example, $1 a day, and they need to buy medicines and food for prices that are even higher than the world prices, and then buy some gas?
Well, clearly, no. There are 2 parts to this question. Part of it is about the development of the market itself, and the problem here is, we have this phrase in the UK, which is always acronym, which is TINA, which Margaret Thatcher used to use, which is called "There is no alternative," TINA. And the problem is if you look at the reality, what is the alternative? If you don't reform the gas market and you go back to the old ways, then you are going to have a whole series of problems. I mean, one of the problems with this is that the old system, whereby you had a special rule for low prices for consumers and higher prices for industry, was not a system of social welfare for Ukrainians. It was a system of social welfare for oligarchs. The system will be plundered as it was plundered before. Now, I think there is an argument for saying that when you're starting to look at all the social funding, perhaps the social funding has to be increased. But that's a separate issue. That's the issue you would look at. It is not the liberalisation. The liberalisation is, if you don't do that, you have several problems. One is you potentially go back to the old system and it will simply be plundered by the oligarchs. The second problem is that once you do that, you're not going to get any Western assistance to reform the market. So you're not going to be able to get all the energy efficiency in place, which will benefit people. You're not going to get the liberalisation, which will deliver lower prices. So I think there are 2 separate things here. One is the liberalisation, which is the right thing to do. And the second question is about the social funding and whether or not there needs to be more social funding. And as I say, I don't see, the TINA thing comes in here. There is no alternative. Anything else, and you end up in a worse situation than you are now. But the real question is, and again, I'm an outsider looking in, is whether or not there needs to be more support for Ukrainians living on $1 a day. Now that is a separate question, but the answer to that question is not to alter the liberalisation of the Ukrainian gas market, because if you do, if you start messing with the reform, you'll make things worse. And as I say, the principal impact of not going through with the reforms will not to make poor Ukrainians better off. It'll make, in fact, it'll make oligarchs better off. And that is the problem with this, is that you begin to fall back into the old system, which does nobody any good. And that is the difficulty here, I think.
Дякую. Наступне запитання.
Thank you very much. Next question. Ukrainian news. Tell us, please, do you believe that Naftogaz can have a deficit of funding because of two decisions of the government, because of Odessa city port with delayed payments, delivery, and also when part of consumers won't pay or will pay 50% in winter and then half of money in summer. We analyzed these decisions, and yesterday's decision was a surprise for me. Also, I want to understand the mechanism of this decision. We will have special obligations to sell gas. Extended payments, and we do not pay gas directly. Oblgazers do this, and this system should be understandable for us. And what will happen with payments of oblgaz? And this is a question for us, and we will have special obligations to provide extended payments to oblgaz and Teplkommunenergo. The question is whether it was coordinated with the Secretariat, and Mr. Merkushov told that these decisions, according to our legislation, should be consulted with the Secretariat, and I believe that the Secretariat didn't participate in consultations on this. And also the second question is about balancing. If it is not balanced, then Naftogaz will have problems. And I am responsible for buying gas from European part, so I won't be able to negotiate these issues with them, so that we cannot have these extended payments. And also there is a a loan from the World Bank, and also we can have some extended payments, but there are some options concerning balancing, but how and what methods will be used? We study these questions now. And also about Odessa port plant, there should be some compensation, and often it happens so that they say, do it, and we compensate, but then they do not provide compensation. But we were promised that this will be balanced decision. Next question, please. Kopen Gennady, ex-pro. Tell us, please, this is question to Yuriy. The first one, Naftogaz partly buys gas, as I understand, from European suppliers. The question, one official said that Naftogaz pays higher price, much higher price for import gas than the price on the stock exchange at the same period. So the question is, why is it so, and is it really true? Could you comment on this? We buy gas from Slovakia at VTP point. This is not right at the border, and then we should pay for exit from Slovakia, and then on the border with Poland and Hungary, and there our suppliers, they sell at the border, we buy it and then pay for exit. And this virtual point in Slovakia and the border between Hungary and Poland are territorially not in Germany, where there is liquid hub Pool. So this virtual point at Slovakia and Hungary and Poland. These are hubs. These are plus transportation price to up to the border with Ukraine, a virtual point with Slovakia, and we never bought gas more than for higher price than at hub and plus transportation price. And sometimes people analyze this, and you should clearly understand this and take into account the details, because when Gazprom waged war against us and blocked supply from Germany, we had to compete on auctions with Gazprom for some capacities, and when the capacities are at the auction, the price is higher than base tariff several times. And you remember that Russian papers wrote that Gazprom spent on this war 5 billion, and it was winter 2014-2015, but we provided gas for Ukraine, but this was a complicated process. And now Gazprom understood that they won't reach any good results with this, and we do not have problems with auctions now, and the price is German hub, but plus transport prices. And in Stockholm, we demand from Gazprom that this price was hub minus transportation price, because these were public declarations of Gazprom that they wanted to do it before 2009. They said that they want to transfer to the formation of the price net back of Germany, and this is economic logic. They should not get more funds from Ukraine than they get de facto from buying, because they pay transportation prices when they bring gas to Germany to sell it at proper price. If they sell to us at different price, as earlier told us, this is an abuse of dominant market position, and due that they have monopoly on export of gas from Russia, and they abuse this, and they try to establish prices that are monopoly prices, monopoly rent that do not correspond the level of the prices that would be if there is proper competition. So this is a complicated question to the simple answer to this simple question. So they take price in Germany, and they forget to add the transportation from Germany to hub. One more question, Roman Valchenka, Interfax Ukraine. This is the question about that the gas market, we are speaking mostly about enterprises and about the population. This is a long way. Do we have some positive developments? Because they said that in autumn they wanted to provide independent suppliers the access to the market, and also there will be some subsidies, but for example, if a person have the possibility to buy not only from guaranteed supplier but also from alternative suppliers, we all know that provision 758 that they established the date from the 1st of April there up to 31st of April. They will do it. So in any case, the 1st of April will be the date when any consumer, including population, will be able to choose supplier. And by law of Ukraine, it is envisaged that any consumer can choose supplier. And even provision 758 provides this. And we will, what we will do with the subsidies, that they cannot be distributed to any supplier. They can not be provided to any supplier. If nothing changes, and if provision 7000 58 will end its action on the 1st of April, so there is no legal limitation for providing gas to population. Yulia Volodymyrovna, our partners or business partners, they say that the price is too high, and experts do not understand this. So please sell it at lower prices. Someone says that the price is too high, and the oligarchs gain from this. So help poor people sell gas at lower prices. No one forbids this. The Cabinet of Ministers established limit price and provided the responsibility to companies that they should provide the gas for this price. But if you are able to provide gas for lower price, please do it. So the Cabinet of Ministers just established this limit in order to balance the situation. Of course, there is problem. The first one is the price that is established by the Cabinet of Ministers. It is low. It is not market price. It doesn't correspond to the price that commercial supplier without obligation from the state to provide to population. So at this price, the commercial supplier won't supply. And the memorandum of IMF provides that from the 1st of April we should completely liberalize the supply of gas to population, but there is an issue. What will happen with the price then? And this issue is acute because we have real monopoly in the market of gas supply to population, and this is not Naftogaz monopoly. We do not provide gas for population. Oblgaz provide this gas for population. This is the monopoly because really, factually, physically, there is only one company in the region that is now supply gas. And the issue is if there is no state regulation and there is, for example, private company and they have difficult, complicated relationship with power. And for example, Firtash, he criticized power and he has complicated relationship with power. And for example, this company was to supply gas for $1,000 and there is no alternative in some location. And there is a big industrial company. There will be someone who want to supply, and oblgaz won't allow this. They will wage war this, and what would the simple people do in this case? And this is a problem. And how can we solve this problem until 1st of April? This is the question. And we voiced this issue, and you heard maybe about this a year ago because I voiced issue before. There are ways how to solve these problems, and for example, in European way, how they did it, there should be competition as concerning supply from Mobilenergo. They have the basis for this, and there are people who can supply, and Naftogaz can enter to retail, and they can propose some alternative to private oblgases. But there is a problem, and as I understand, it is not practically solved. I have a proposal, so there won't be other questions, and maybe we will have some remarks from you, maybe final remarks, please. So about the last question, we can support what our colleagues said. So this provision 758, the price, retail price should be different. The formula is price at hub, then transport plus distribution. And the tariff for distribution is different. Like Naftogaz do not implement this formula. They start from the last indicator. So this is the first problem that will appear if we distribute this. These prices will be different. And the second problem, what was said before, so in the gas market, the delivery, the suppliers, they are subsidiaries of the distribution companies. How to control these meters of gas? This is the big problem. And in order that the household consumer choose supplier, we should change legislation. And maybe it won't happen from the 1st of April next year, but we should work in this direction more. Alan, if you have some
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things which are worth mentioning. One is, what do you do? The first thing is, as I was saying earlier, if you start undermining the liberalization process, you lose everything. The evidence from the European Union is that the most liberalized states have the lowest prices. And they have the lowest prices over time. That's absolutely clear from the evidence. But there are lots of things that can be done. I talked about whether or not you needed more social funding. One of the major opportunities is in relation to energy efficiency and bringing on more energy efficiency, particularly in terms of domestically, to reduce the use of heat in houses. There are EU funds available for that. Now, focusing that, trying to bring that forward, trying to get that moving, trying to get more funds from the EU to do that, that is something which is very valuable, because that will really impact on a lot of those households which are facing higher prices. So that is something which could work really well. And the other point which is worth mentioning is this. I mentioned earlier about the difficulty of doing this. It is amazingly difficult to do. It has been incredibly difficult in Europe. We mentioned Gas to France earlier. Gas to France is still resisting to this day. I'll give you one example. So this is like, despite the fact we've been doing this for 20 years, one of the big opportunities in Europe is that there is 61 billion cubic meters of gasification capacity in Spain. And the Spanish only use about 20% of it. So about 40 billion cubic meters of gas, potentially, there's lots of LNG about, could come into Europe, which would be great. The problem is the pipeline from Spain to France only can take 7 billion cubic meters. And the Gas to France has been resisting 4 years to increase the pipeline capacity. And the Commission is just forcing them towards a 15 billion cubic meter pipeline. But in reality, they should be building something twice as big as that. So, and this is, a dominant company resisting liberalization year after year, and there's a continual battle going on. So, that is actually more conservative, more monopolistic than the position in Ukraine.
Thank you, Ron. Пані Тетяно, якщо є останні ремарки, заключні.
Я буквально пару слів, якщо слів по
A couple of words, just a couple of words. I fully agree with Alan when he showed an example of 20 years that were required by Europe to go to move into direction of liberalization. And in Ukraine, we have a longer way ahead of us. We have to first, this makes first step. Look, Ukrainians are poor not because of bad reforming of Naftogaz, but because those reforming was not started earlier, much earlier. In order to make our country more successful and more rich, we have to finalize reforming. As Mr. Riley mentioned, that reforms are very complicated, they are very demanding, and we have started them. We work for the sake of Ukrainians. You can agree with us, you can disagree with us, but without complicated, very comprehensive reforming, we won't be able to become more successful. Yuri, you have just a couple of seconds. I agree that the reforming is very complicated, and I believe that the more fast we are in restructuring of Naftogaz, the more faster liberalization we will have in the market. Thank you to all the participants of our today's roundtable. I hope that we slightly moved in our understanding whether we do have market, gas market or not. I would like to thank to the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center and Ukrainian Center. of energy reforming. I'm Dmytro Vasilyev, and if you have any comments as to today, please, you are welcome to submit them. Thank you.